Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. Today's video is looking at bush beans, aka French dwarf beans. I think they're one of the most underrated crops, and this video is going to show you why we should all take them more seriously and why I think they're one of the most important crops for the summer garden. There are so many benefits that bush beans can bring to your vegetable garden, and we'll cover as many as possible today. Firstly, we're going to look at the shape of a plant. So dwarf French beans are short, stocky, and they have a single stem, which means that you can actually lean them away from other crops. So these growing characteristics of bush beans means that they make excellent gap pluggers. In your garden, you're always going to have small spaces and gaps in and around your beds where you could fit a plant, and dwarf beans are excellent for that. So I've just got a little gap here that I'm going to plant this dwarf bean, and I also do other things in terms of gap plugging. So I've got dill here and calendula, any kind of annual herb or edible flower. I don't actually plan them into my garden plan, I just fit them around all the little openings that happen on the garden, and there's always plenty. Very often either at the end or at the sides of a raised bed where I already have crops growing, I can actually get the dwarf beans and plant them right up against the side, and then kind of allow them to grow using the single stem out, so they're not actually hindering any of the other crops. And I can't really think of many other plants that fit that category where they can grow away and not affect plants on a single stem. Perhaps kohlrabi is the closest, but this is a thing that I love about dwarf French beans. Because of their short and fairly stocky growth habit and actually creating a lot of leaves, they actually work really well at helping to suppress weeds because it's so shady and dark underneath, but also to prevent evaporation. Because you have a single stem and all of those leaves, they almost act as a living green mulch to retain moisture. You can use the shade that dwarf beans create to your advantage. So if you say planted a row of dwarf beans on the south side of, say, a row of lettuce or some other salad which is prone to running to seed in hot, dry weather, it can actually help cool it down, retain the moisture, and prolong your salad harvest from that space. One of the most impressive things about bush beans is actually the turnaround time from sowing to harvesting. In peak season, you can expect to get harvest around 10 weeks after sowing. So that means if you sow a load in the first week of June, you can expect to harvest them around mid-August. Now, if you haven't actually grown dwarf beans before and you're not too sure if you like them or not, what you can do is buy them from a local garden centre, just a tray like this, and give them a try. And what it also means is, because these are basically 2 weeks on from sowing, you can actually harvest the dwarf beans within 2 months of transplanting. And that isn't actually too long to wait for quite a significant and tasty crop. So usually for outdoor sowings, I sow every couple of weeks a tray of beans from late April, early May, all the way through to the start of July. So at the start of July, I can expect to harvest things around mid-September. Sometimes I will do it a bit later, but then it risks running potential early frosts, which unfortunately dwarf beans don't like. For undercover growing, I'll actually extend the final sowing to around mid-July, usually because the first frosts for us are really light and they're not actually that cold, and it doesn't affect what's inside the polytunnel. So I'm willing to stretch it an extra couple of weeks. I encourage you to sow a small batch of bush beans every couple of weeks and not actually plan for where they're going to go in the garden. Instead, have a challenge where whatever do come up, you've got to plant them in those gaps that emerge. And following this will ensure consistent harvest of bush beans throughout the entire summer and into early autumn. I love growing climbing beans, whether it's climbing French beans, pole beans, runner beans, they're all fantastic and add a lot of structure and interest to the garden. But you can actually interplant bush beans with your climbing beans because they will occupy the space at the bottom, and then the tall ones will occupy the space above them. So what I'm going to do here using these that I've bought is I'm actually going to plant one in between every bamboo on the outside, and then in this little strip of space I'm going to be able to get a huge amount of food regardless of what happens above them. One of the highlights of growing bush beans is you actually have quite a big choice with not only the beans that you grow, for example, Yin Yang look absolutely incredible beans, but also the colour of the pods. So just like here we've got crimson flowered broad beans which look stunning, and then we've got the white ones as well. We can take that idea of aesthetic for bush beans because we actually can grow different coloured pods. Of course we have the green, which are easily lost, but we can also grow yellow podded bush beans and purple podded bush beans, and they add a lot of interest to your garden visually. Bush beans are actually one of the easiest crops to germinate. Unlike other kinds of beans, they don't actually need a deep taproot, so any kind of smallish pot will work, or module tray, and you plant them around 2 centimeters deep, just under an inch deep, and then keep them watered and they'll be up in no time. One other benefit that I just can't forget to mention about bush beans is if you have a container or a patio garden, they're one of the best legumes to actually grow in pots. They don't take up much root space, they're really easy and carefree, and they give you a big crop for a little bit of space. So I've mentioned how bush beans and dwarf beans are excellent to intercrop with climbing beans, for example, up this kind of structure. But if you are growing climbing beans, I've actually made this video here, which gives you a ton of different crops that you can interplant with climbing beans to maximize the productivity of your garden.